Earth's Age Challenge. For most of human history, the age of our world wasn't a question of science, but of faith and philosophy. It was a story told in sacred texts, a number derived from generations, a past that felt knowable, contained, and human-sized. But by the dawn of the 20th century, science was beginning to ask the question in a new language, the language of physics. And the man who answered with the most authority, the man who set the scientific world's agenda, was a titan of his time, Lord Kelvin. He was a figure of immense intellectual power, a celebrity scientist whose word was practically law. And his verdict on the Earth's age was clear, concise, and, as it would turn out, spectacularly wrong. Kelvin approached the problem with elegant, classical physics. He imagined the Earth as it once was, a molten sphere of rock, white-hot and incandescent, slowly, inexorably cooling over time. He reasoned that by measuring the current temperature of the Earth, its rate of heat loss, and calculating backward, he could determine exactly when it solidified. It was like finding a warm cannonball on a battlefield and calculating when it was fired. His mathematics were impeccable, his logic seemingly unassailable. His conclusion? The Earth was young, shockingly young. His initial estimates put our planet's age somewhere between 20 and 40 million years. To the public and to many scientists, this was a revelation, a definitive numerical answer to an age-old mystery. But to another group of scientists, Kelvin's number was not a revelation, it was a death sentence. In the quiet halls of universities and on dusty geological expeditions, naturalists and geologists were reading a very different story, written not in equations, but in stone. They saw vast canyons carved by slow, patient rivers, mountains of sediment laid down grain by grain over unimaginable timescales, and continents that had been ground down and uplifted in cycles of creation and destruction. Charles Darwin, the father of evolution, knew that his theory of natural selection required a colossal stage upon which to play out. The slow, gradual process of evolution, the branching of the tree of life from a single common ancestor into millions of diverse forms, needed time, lots of time. Kelvin's 20 million years was a straitjacket, a suffocatingly short runway for life's grand epic. It simply wasn't enough. This created a profound schism in the scientific world. On one side stood the physicists, led by the formidable Lord Kelvin, armed with the hard certainty of mathematics and thermodynamics. On the other stood the geologists and biologists, armed with mountains of observational evidence, fossils, rock strata, and the silent testimony of the Earth itself. It was a clash of disciplines, a standoff between the clockwork universe of physics and the sprawling, messy history of the natural world. The physicists accused the geologists of being imprecise, of practicing a soft science that lacked mathematical rigor. The geologists retorted that the physicists' models were too simplistic, that they were ignoring the complexities of the planet itself. For decades, the debate raged, with Kelvin and the physicists holding the upper hand. How could you argue with the laws of heat and energy? Kelvin's calculations seemed absolute. His model had one major assumption, one fatal flaw, but nobody knew it yet. He assumed the Earth was simply cooling down, with no internal engine to keep it warm. Then, at the turn of the century, a discovery in a Paris laboratory changed everything. Henri Becquerel, working with uranium salts, found they emitted a mysterious, penetrating energy completely on their own. Soon after, Marie and Pierre Curie isolated the elements responsible, polonium and radium, and called the phenomenon radioactivity. This wasn't just a curiosity, it was a fundamental crack in the foundation of classical physics. Here was a source of energy that seemed to spring from nothing, a process that generated heat from within the very atoms of matter. The Earth was not just a cooling cannonball, it had a fire in its belly. This radioactive decay, happening deep within the planet's core and crust, was a hidden furnace, constantly replenishing the heat that Kelvin thought was simply bleeding away into space. His calculations weren't wrong, his starting assumptions were. The cannonball wasn't just cooling, it was generating its own heat. This discovery blew the debate wide open. The age of the Earth was once again an open question, and Kelvin's tight timeline was shattered. But radioactivity offered more than just a rebuttal to an old theory. Hidden within its steady, predictable decay was something far more profound: a clock. A clock unlike any other, one that had been ticking silently inside rocks since the dawn of time. A clock that could measure not thousands or even millions, but billions of years. All that was needed was a brilliant, tenacious mind to figure out how to read it. The stage was set for a scientific revolution, a journey into the abyss of deep time. But this journey would not be celebrated by all. For unlocking the Earth's true immense age would not just rewrite textbooks. It would challenge the economic and philosophical foundations of the modern world and awaken the fury of an empire built on a very different concept of time. The quest for truth was about to begin, and its pioneer would soon find himself in the crosshairs of unimaginable power.
Block 2. Radiometric Revolution. The discovery of radioactivity had demolished Lord Kelvin's argument, but it hadn't yet built a new one. It proved the Earth could be much older, but it didn't say how much. The key that would unlock this ultimate secret lay in the patient, predictable nature of radioactive decay. And the man who would turn that key, the quiet genius who would build the geological clock from scratch, was a young, unassuming British geologist named Arthur Holmes. While his contemporaries were still debating theories, Holmes was in the laboratory getting his hands dirty. He was a man possessed by a single, monumental idea: that the atoms within a rock could tell you its story, its true date of birth. Holmes understood the core principle with a clarity that few others possessed. He saw that certain elements, like uranium, were unstable. Over vast stretches of time, a uranium atom would spontaneously decay, transforming into a different, more stable element, lead. This process happened at a fixed, measurable rate, a rate as reliable as the ticking of a clock. It was nature's own hourglass. When a volcanic rock crystallizes from molten magma, it's like turning over a new hourglass. At that moment, the rock contains a certain amount of the parent isotope, uranium, but virtually none of the final daughter isotope, lead. As eons pass, the uranium atoms slowly transform into lead atoms. The sand in the top of the hourglass trickles to the bottom. By meticulously measuring the ratio of uranium to lead in an ancient rock sample, Holmes realized he could calculate exactly how long that hourglass had been running. He could, in effect, ask the rock its age, and it would answer with the undeniable precision of nuclear physics. This was revolutionary, but it was anything but easy. The work was painstaking, a masterclass in scientific grit. It required crushing ancient rocks to powder, dissolving them in powerful acids, and performing incredibly delicate chemical separations to isolate the minuscule quantities of uranium and lead. This was the frontier of analytical chemistry, performed with equipment that looks primitive by today's standards. Funding was scarce, and skepticism was rampant. The established geological community was wary of these newfangled techniques from the world of physics. Many saw Holmes not as a visionary, but as an alchemist, dabbling in forces that weren't the proper domain of a geologist. He was often a lone voice, a young researcher pushing an idea that was too radical, too vast for the establishment to readily accept. But Holmes was relentless. In 1911, while still just an undergraduate, he performed his first dating calculations on a piece of rock from Norway, arriving at an age of 370 million years. This was already an order of magnitude greater than Kelvin's upper limits. He was just getting started. In 1913, he published his seminal book, The Age of the Earth, in which he laid out the principles of radiometric dating and presented a collection of dates from rocks around the world, systematically pushing back the frontiers of time. He argued that the Earth was, at a minimum, 1.6 billion years old. The scientific community was stunned. It was a number so immense it was difficult to comprehend. It provided more than enough time for Darwin's evolution and for the slow, grand processes of geology to unfold. It was, for many scientists, a moment of profound liberation. Holmes's great quest was to find the oldest rocks on Earth, the Genesis rocks, that would give him the ultimate answer. He knew that the planet's surface was constantly being recycled through erosion and plate tectonics, so finding pristine, ancient samples was a monumental challenge. He analyzed rocks from every corner of the globe, each new measurement refining his geological clock. His work transformed geology from a descriptive science into a quantitative one. No longer were geologists limited to saying one rock layer was older than another. Now they could say it was 400 million years older. This quantification of deep time was his greatest gift to science. This profound revelation, however, was not confined to the ivory towers of academia. It began to ripple outwards, shaking the foundations of other fields, including economics and industry. The world was in the midst of an industrial boom, fueled by an insatiable hunger for resources pulled from the earth: coal, oil, and minerals. The industries built on these resources operated on a specific understanding of the planet. Their models for exploration, their predictions of resource availability, and their entire long-term strategy were implicitly based on the old, shorter geological timescale. The idea that the processes that create oil and concentrate minerals took not tens of millions, but hundreds of millions or even billions of years was a disruptive, inconvenient truth. It suggested that these resources were not renewable on any human timescale, that their formation was a product of a planetary history so vast it was almost beyond imagination. Arthur Holmes had given science the true scale of our past, but in doing so, he had inadvertently painted a target on his back. His geological clock was ticking, and for a powerful new industrial empire, it was sounding like a time bomb.
Industry's vengeance. The work of Arthur Holmes and the reality of a multi-billion-year-old Earth should have been celebrated as one of the greatest scientific achievements of the 20th century. And within the halls of geology and biology, it was. It was the unifying theory that finally reconciled the evidence in the rocks with the mechanisms of evolution. But outside of those halls, in the boardrooms of the burgeoning fossil fuel and mining industries, this new truth was received not with awe, but with alarm. This wasn't just an abstract number. It was a fundamental shift in the paradigm of the planet, a direct threat to a narrative of infinite abundance and rapid, predictable resource formation that underpinned their entire economic model. Why was an ancient Earth so dangerous to them? It came down to the control of time and resources. The nascent oil industry, for example, was built on a model of aggressive exploration and exploitation. While they didn't operate on a formal young Earth theory, their operational mindset was implicitly short-term. The geological processes that created vast reservoirs of oil were complex and not fully understood. But a younger planet suggested these processes might be more rapid, more repeatable. An Earth that was billions of years old, however, told a different story.
It meant that the oil they were pumping out was the product of specific, rare conditions across unimaginable stretches of time. It was a finite inheritance from a deep past, not a readily renewable commodity. This introduced a terrifying new variable into their long-term planning: absolute scarcity. A 4.5 billion-year-old Earth makes a 100-year supply of oil seem terrifyingly fleeting. This inconvenient truth spurred a quiet but determined campaign of resistance. This wasn't a cartoonish villain vowing to destroy homes in a public square. It was far more insidious. A systemic effort to sow doubt, to delay acceptance, and to control the scientific narrative. The first line of attack was academic. Industries began to selectively fund university departments and research projects that focused on alternative, non-radiometric methods of dating, or that sought to find flaws and inconsistencies in Holmes's work. They promoted scientists who were skeptical of the new techniques, giving them platforms and prestige. They argued that radiometric dating was an unproven, black box technology, too complex and theoretical to be trusted over the practical knowledge of field geologists who were often on their payroll. The message was subtle but clear. This new science is controversial, the jury is still out, and it's best to stick with the old ways of thinking. The second front was public perception and education. Through their immense influence and public relations arms, these industries worked to keep the concept of deep time out of the mainstream. They lobbied for educational standards that glossed over the Earth's true age, focusing instead on more practical aspects of geology relevant to resource extraction. They funded museum exhibits that celebrated the bounty of the Earth without dwelling on the eons it took to create it. This created a generation lack in public understanding. While the scientific consensus was solidifying around Holmes's timeline by the mid-20th century, the public consciousness remained decades behind. By keeping the Earth's true age a matter of scientific debate in the public mind, they could continue to operate without the uncomfortable questions about long-term sustainability that an ancient Earth inevitably raised. For Arthur Holmes himself, the resistance meant a long, frustrating struggle for recognition. For decades, his work was considered fringe by many powerful figures in geology, particularly in North America, where the oil industry's influence was strongest. He struggled for funding, and his publications were often met with stiff opposition. He was a man ahead of his time, and he paid the professional price for it. He was challenging not just a scientific theory, but a deeply entrenched economic worldview. He was telling an industry built on rapid exploitation that they were drawing from a finite bank account that had taken billions of years to accumulate. It was a message they were simply not prepared to hear. Ultimately, however, truth has a power that no industry can suppress forever. As the technology of radiometric dating improved, becoming more precise and irrefutable, the evidence became overwhelming. By the 1950s, with Patterson's dating of meteorites, the age of the Earth was firmly established at 4.5 billion years. Arthur Holmes, once the lone revolutionary, was finally vindicated. His work became the bedrock of modern Earth science, the fundamental principle upon which our entire understanding of the planet is built. The story of his struggle is a powerful, enduring reminder that science is not conducted in a vacuum. It is a human endeavor, subject to the pressures of money, power, and ideology. The man who gave us the gift of deep time had to fight an empire that wished to keep us all thinking in the shallow end of history. His triumph shows that while powerful interests can delay the truth and they can punish the truth teller, they can never truly destroy it.